It all started with a shipment of boxes piled on the sidewalk, and the smell of fresh bread mixing with the chilly morning. It wasn't my house, not my room, and as strange as it seemed, there I was, waking up in the emptiness of a new address while my parents started over on the other side of the country. Maybe it was the way Parker yelled my name from the kitchen, natural like it had always been routine, or the icy gusts of wind coming through the cracks in the old windows. The fact is, from then on, my days were destined to take a turn I never expected. They called it a family favor, but I knew. One quick look at my reflection in the hall mirror was enough to feel the weight and hesitation of someone who's just passing through. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to access more stories like this. My name is Jamie. I'm 22, the quiet college student who almost never truly connects with anyone, unless it's through the stroke of a pencil. The universe I'd built so far didn't fit into boxes, nor did it blend with the family recipes that perfumed that house. You know that feeling of I need to fit in here even if it's just for a few weeks? That's how shyly I accepted Parker's invitation to temporarily live with them. The guest room was simple. Twin bed, gray curtain, a desk stained with ink. Paradise for anyone who appreciates the anonymity of used things. From the outside, it looked like shelter. But inside, every wall exuded stories that weren't mine. My daily life gained strange frames. Every morning I was woken by the sounds of dishes, cereal bowls, muffled laughter. Parker's dad left early, punctual as always. Mrs. Richardson, that infallible maternal figure with 1,000 ways to offer affection without smothering, spent her days between remote meetings and recipes that invariably turned into an invitation for afternoon coffee. Parker was my link to that microcosm, outgoing, full of energy, always on the go, always promising, "I'll be back in a bit." The sound of hurried little feet running through the hallways never let me forget that I was, in any case, inserted into a routine that wasn't mine. What you hear here is just the beginning. The complete stories, unfiltered and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. See the link in the description right now. The Richardsons' house smelled of warm cake and nostalgia. Old photos hanging in the dining room told the story of the boys in oversized uniforms, leaning bicycles, and wide smiles. The wall clock, a family heirloom, ticked time with precision. In the backyard, a mango tree overshadowed the rusty swing, holding laughter and storms I hadn't lived through. My sketchbook became my silent kingdom. As soon as the house emptied, I'd transport myself to the kitchen table, aimlessly sketching lines, inventing worlds on paper. My creative process conversed more with silence than with anyone. It was in the silence, in fact, that I missed everything. My home, myself, and who I could be there. My parents said changes bring opportunities, but all I felt was a lack of reference. Most of the time passed quickly. Wake up, pretend to participate in breakfast, listen to Parker's weekend plans, escape for a walk around the neighborhood observing the surroundings, semi-detached facades, dogs barking behind gates, children drawing with chalk on the sidewalk. It looked like a movie about American suburban life. Everything in its place, except me. The feeling of displacement was constant, not just in my body, but especially in my head. I lived at my best friend's house, but it was like existing on standby, between the old and the new. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at the lit sky in the late afternoon, wondering where, after all, life was trying to push me. The few attempts to fit in were almost always frustrated. And when night fell, I'd arrange my art supplies in geometric rows, as if bringing order to the disordered things outside brought me some control. And that's when Simon came home. An afternoon with the aroma of coffee and sun cutting through the window pane. I was distracted stacking pans and listening to Mrs. Richardson's beaded bracelet jingling behind me when the front door slammed shut. Parker yelled, "He's here!" And in an instant, the mood changed. I'll continue the story from Simon's return, maintaining a continuous narrative, as I approach the word limit per response. I'll proceed with topics 1-5, always true to the style and request. Simon walked in dragging a black suitcase, a blue jacket slung over his shoulder. The same boyish smile I remembered from past birthdays. But there was something new in his eyes, a kind of dusty calm, the confidence of someone who has weathered storms. His hair was shorter, his beard defined, and he greeted me with a strong hug and a "What's up, man?" as if time hadn't stretched our distance so much. Parker ran to show off his new trophies on the shelf, smiling proudly, while Simon sat on the sofa and looked around, like someone confirming their own territory. I stood there, a bit out of place, near the kitchen, summoning courage to say anything that would signal I existed, even if temporarily, in that family picture. It was Mrs. Richardson who broke the ice. "Jamie's been with us for a few days, did you see? Now we have 2 lost sons around here," she joked, tossing a dish towel into my hands. Simon smirked, giving me a knowing look, and for a second, I felt that knot in my stomach that only appears when our body senses the arrival of a small, internal hurricane. It wasn't exactly attraction, not yet, but that strange feeling that someone is about to read our secrets. In the following days, Simon reconnected with the family in his usual quiet way. He worked in his old room, sometimes spent the afternoon fixing something in the garage, or sat with Parker revisiting old childhood stories. At night, we watched cooking shows together, because Parker insisted, and because no one there mastered the stove better than the lady of the house. Laughter came easily to them. For me, it was observing from the outside, the kind of coexistence I rarely had. Over time, the house changed. The dynamic rebalanced. Simon, now a constant presence, began to notice details everyone else ignored. The dripping faucet, my sketchbook hidden in the corner of the table, the coffee I made stronger and left to cool on top of the microwave. He was observant, but not intrusive. He always respected my silences, but also knew how to find openings to talk without seeming like he was trying. When I least expected it, he'd make unexpected comments, the kind that show he notices the unspoken. One day, for example, I came home early and Simon was disassembling the living room lamp, covered in dust and with a crooked smile on his face. "It was just a loose wire, but with a little patience we can fix anything," he said, almost like he was dropping a hint about life. I returned a shy smile, shoving my hands in my pockets, and could only mumble something silly about tiring days. He didn't pressure me. He kept working but threw in a, "If you need help with your drawings, just call me, okay?" before disappearing down the hallway. At that moment, I felt an unsaid invitation, like a password exchanged between old accomplices. Little by little, our routines began to cross in unlikely places. One rainy afternoon, I helped Simon carry boxes to the attic. Another, he offered to go grocery shopping with me, claiming he needed to stretch his legs after working from home. We walked through the neighborhood, sharing bags and mundane stories, until Simon asked me about my drawings. Instead of dodging the subject as I always did, I decided to show him. I opened my sketchbook, carefully turning the pages, feeling my heart race with each exposed image. Simon looked with rare attention, the kind of look from someone who is truly seeing, not just observing. "You make people look more honest on paper than in real life," he commented, smiling slightly. That disarmed me inside, because no one had ever noticed that part of my work. On the way home, we continued in silence, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It felt comfortable, as if his presence filled an empty piece of my daily life. However, no closeness happens without big doubts and small saboteurs. I carried with me a collection of anxious thoughts. Did my presence there bother anyone? I felt a pang of guilt every time Parker asked about my parents, and I dodged the subject to avoid talking about missing them. And Simon, always so self-assured, sometimes became absorbed by the window, staring into his own labyrinths. One night, I caught a photo album open beside his bed. Old photos with a guy I'd never seen. Simon's lost gaze, and the hurried way he closed the album told me a lot without words. He also carried severed stories, missed connections, hidden vulnerabilities. The external setting also presented its challenges. The house, always full, forced us to measure every gesture. The fear of appearing intrusive or causing embarrassment with Parker was constant. Sometimes I found myself overthinking every sentence, trying not to cross some invisible boundary that coexistence imposed. One Sunday night, as we were all talking in the living room, Parker made a joke that, to me, sounded unintentionally harsh. Simon defended my point of view with gentleness and humor. It was quick, barely noticed, but I felt a different kind of loyalty grow within me. During coffee breaks, between tidying the house and sharing chores, my gaze toward Simon changed. There was a raw curiosity, a mix of admiration and desire that I refused to name. My mind rehearsed entire conversations before bed, as if I could control the outcome just by organizing the words better. I fantasized about various reactions: respect, embarrassment, disapproval. But in his every small gesture, there was a silent invitation for me to let my guard down, and perhaps let something new happen. I even thought that this type of connection, fluid and full of silent expectations, only existed in movies or books. But there, it made itself felt in the details. A touch on the arm when passing through the kitchen, Simon's prolonged gaze when he spoke of some childhood memory, the way he turned to me for small opinions, as if he trusted me more than others. I began to realize that, deep down, it wasn't just friendship. There was a new code, a thread pulling us closer. But on the other side, fear. Fear of Parker, noticing too much or too little. Fear of Simon wanting nothing more than that suspended coexistence. Fear of losing the little stability I had gained there. There was a whole history of people not noticing my limits, of people leaving before I could ask them to stay. And now, it was different. I wanted Simon to stay. I wanted to understand what was behind that careful smile, that way of protecting others and closing himself off. The day came when the house emptied. It was Saturday morning, the family getting ready for lunch out. Parker left early. Mrs. Richardson went to visit an aunt, only returning on Sunday. Simon and I were left in charge of the house. An officially simple mission, but full of new subtextual implications. Restless, I tried to fill every hour with mechanical tasks, organizing my pencils, reviewing college assignments, loading the dishwasher. He, in his own way, fiddled in the garage, fixing a stuck window, lifting boxes, and disappearing behind the gate whenever a neighbor crossed the street. In the late afternoon, everything seemed slower. I arrived in the kitchen and found Simon bent over a box full of photos. The sun streamed through the window, painting the room golden, stretching shadows on the walls. He called me over to see some old images, old family trips, messy kids in a park, Parker with baby teeth and spiky hair, teenage Simon carrying Parker on his back. I found myself looking more at his hands moving over the photos than at the memories captured on paper. Every movement was calm, definite, a silence this time, charged with intentions. Then, he invited me to have a refreshment outside, in the backyard. The afternoon was warm, the cicadas made an insistent whisper, and there was the smell of wet earth from the plants watered earlier. We sat on the porch steps. Simon idly fiddled with a fabric bracelet on his wrist, while I fit bottle caps between my fingers, seeking any light conversation. Weather, neighborhood news, plans for the semester. But neither of us seemed truly interested in the surface of the conversation. The wind made the mango tree leaves sway, drawing moving patches of shadow on the ground. I was the first to break the pattern, bringing up the letter Parker wrote as a child. Simon laughed, averted his gaze to the garden, and said, "Funny. Sometimes you only realize how much you miss a home when you lose yourself." The sentence hung in the air. I wanted to ask if he was just talking about the house or something more, but I stayed quiet, preferring to just observe. He kept looking at my hands, as if analyzing every gesture, and a small silence settled between us. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was rather a pause full of anticipation, heavy with unspoken meanings. Simon said something about my art, said he envied how I could transform discomfort into something beautiful. I wanted to deny it, but he wasn't expecting an answer. Night arrived calmly. We had a simple dinner, pasta with pre-made sauce, quickly chopped salad, a cold beer shared in 2 mugs. As we ate, the conversation veered off the trivial track and began to risk small confessions. I asked about his travels. He spoke of places he wanted to visit to feel more whole, mentioned fears, interrupted dreams. At some point, Simon looked at me with that gaze of someone who sees through walls, beyond what we show. I think I tried to be the guy the family needed, but I forgot to be the guy I wanted to be, he blurted out, his voice low, cutting through the quiet of the room. I saw him searching for something in my reactions, maybe approval, maybe just a listening ear. That moved me more than it should have. I tapped my fork against my mug just to make a sound, pretended to reach for a seasoning, but I was just escaping the emotion. When we finished dinner, I suggested we go to the living room to watch an old movie. He agreed, grabbed a blanket, adjusted the armchair, and we sat side by side, shoulders almost touching. The movie was just a backdrop for something else that pressed in. Our breaths, our averted glances, the way our knees brushed sometimes, as if by accident. My chest pounded, as if each beat sought permission, or courage, to cross that thin barrier between desire and apprehension. Time flowed densely, and the tension between the desire to remain still and the urge to move forward alternated with every second. Simon, at one point, put his arm over the back of the couch, not quite touching me, but making clear an intention of presence, a promise of comfort. It wasn't rushed. It was just a silent invitation. If I wanted, I could move closer. The smell of fabric softener on the blanket, the warmth of his body so close, a slight tremor in his voice as he commented on something in the movie. Everything contributed to keeping me alert, my senses open. When the credits rolled, we stayed there for a few more minutes. I took a deep breath, trying to name that electricity, that suffocating urge to cross the last distance. He turned to me, eyes locked on mine, and said, almost in a whisper, "You don't have to hide here. Not from me." The world seemed to go silent for a moment. I swallowed hard, lost track of what was shy or brave. I felt my hand, hesitant, reach for his on the couch. He didn't pull away. On the contrary, he intertwined his fingers with mine. We stayed like that, frozen in time, breathing together, hearing the house breathe around us. We knew the night was just beginning. The atmosphere in the room completely changed, as if the walls had understood what was about to happen. We stood up, almost simultaneously, and looked at each other, this time, without averting our eyes. The invitation hung in the air, suspended between old fear and new courage. We went upstairs in silence, light steps, Simon leading the way, and me guided by the subtle scent of the soap he always used. I didn't feel cold, didn't feel nervous. I only felt that kind of pleasant stupor, like the anticipation of something that's already inevitable. In his room, the lamplight cast soft shapes on the edges of the bed. He closed the door slowly, looked at me again, not with hunger or haste, but with that calm of someone memorizing details forever. I felt a warm wave rise through my body. He stopped in front of me, his hands resting on my shoulders, and brought his face closer as if sharing a secret. The kiss was delicate, smelling of dry wind and the warmth of promises. It wasn't voracious. It was slow, like someone savoring every nuance, every hesitation finally overcome. The feeling was similar to opening a box stored for years and finding something so precious inside that you're afraid to touch it. Simon's hands traveled slowly along the back of my neck, gently tracing down my back, like someone discovering an ancient map. I responded to his touches as if my skin, until then, hadn't known what it was like to be looked at with such care. It was as if every part of my body was finally being deciphered. There was no rush, just the pleasure of being there, whole and unmasked. We lay down, the bed creaking softly under our weight, and I ran my fingertips along his arm, feeling the hairs raise on my skin. Every gesture was subtle, yet full of meaning. The way Simon held my hand, as if saying, "You are safe with me," his breathing changing rhythm, alternating between expectation and surrender. The light in the room was dim, but enough to see the contours of his face, the discreet smile, and the gaze full of rare tenderness. He leaned in, his lips tracing mine, softly descending to my neck, creating a slow trail of fire. I felt every breath, every touch, every intention hidden in small gestures, as if that moment could stretch forever if we wanted it to. Simon ran his hand across my face, pausing his thumb on my cheekbone before hugging me again. It wasn't a rushed encounter. It was a succession of promises made in detail, in the way our bodies sought to fit together. I rested my head against his chest, listened to his heartbeat, felt his warm skin and the smell of aftershave. Time stopped there, two bodies recognizing each other in the vulnerability of the night. The touch was like silk sliding over a wheat field, subtle, yet profound, an electric current that started at my fingertips and slowly climbed, filling every crevice. There was an exchange there, of warmth, of breath, of subtlety. The world outside that room seemed old, distant, almost unreal. Desire grew alongside tenderness, in a dance without choreography, made only of the good improvisation of those who recognize each other. Our bodies found their own rhythm, alternating intensity and sweetness, exploring time without calculating it, just trusting in the gentle exchange that was being founded there. Words became scarce. Only low sounds remained. Sighs mixed with the creaking of the bed, the absent tick-tock of the clock, everything dissolving into the intensity of that moment. It was as if we were rebuilding, stone by stone, everything that daily life doesn't allow. Affection unfolded into desire. Desire sustained itself in care, and every new touch was a confirmation. We were there saying, to each other, "You are not alone." The world outside stopped mattering. Between the sheets, we found each other as if we had always belonged to that moment. Suddenly, all the old fear seemed small, faded, overcome. What remained was only a warm certainty. There, sharing that quietness after so much waiting. Finally, I was seen, desired, and embraced, with all my silences, my doubts, and my desires laid bare. When everything calmed down, we stayed together, breathing slowly, legs intertwined, hands resting on each other. Our breaths softened, our hearts found a common rhythm. The noise of the world stayed on the other side of the door, leaving only the promise that something within both of us was irreversible. We were still resting in the sheets, the room filled with human warmth and the good scent of happy people. Simon looked at me with those clear eyes, a mix of sleep and contentment, and gently ran his fingers through my hair, in lazy movements. For a few minutes, no one spoke. The newly built intimacy filled the entire space, as if every sigh, every silence, had more weight than an entire conversation. I felt the reverberations of the encounter growing within me. It was as if a part of me, which had always cowered in fear of not being loved, had finally emerged from the shadows. It wasn't just a satisfied body, it was a warm heart in my chest, a mind still in a trance trying to organize everything that had changed from that point on. I remembered the first night in that house, the initial discomfort, the struggle to find my own place, and I realized that now, there really was a corner where I fit. Simon wasn't just my best friend's brother, nor just the guy with the easy humor and affable smile. He was someone who saw parts of me that no one had ever bothered to decipher. Between lazy kisses and long glances, I felt that time, for the first time, was working in my favor, not as an enemy. The weight of old traumas ceased to be the protagonist, giving way to a collection of silent promises made right there, that night. Still, millions of questions bloomed in my head. What about Parker? How would we handle things from now on? It was too soon for any confessions, but the desire to preserve that new space, just ours, roared inside me. Simon also seemed to understand this silent pact. There was no demand, no trace of fear, only respect for what had just emerged. Unprecedented trust, a strong bond, regardless of what the future held. Our dynamic changed after that day. We spent more time together without needing to invent excuses. Easy smiles, subtle touches in the hallways, the way Simon lightly touched my hand when no one was looking. Our silences, once uncomfortable, became comfort. If before the house was a backdrop for others, now every command of the stove, every shared laugh in front of the television, carried a layer of meaning that no one else there would perceive. At night, lying in my room, I kept thinking about everything that had changed. What was once longing became presence. What was a ghost became a hug, the smell of coffee, a knowing smile. In the silence, I ran my hand over the pages of my sketchbook and, without realizing it, drew two half-hidden faces, crossed glances, discreet smiles. It was almost a secret etched in graphite. That moment, that night, forever. I noticed that I no longer carried the same fear. It wasn't about fitting in anymore, but about finding someone willing to share the small world I had defended so fiercely. Simon noticed. And, in the end, that's all that changes our lives. Someone agreeing to walk through our darkness and sit beside us, just because. In the morning, when Parker returned, distracted, full of news, oblivious to the underground movement happening in the house, no one needed to know anything. The exchanged glances with Simon, the way we shared bread at breakfast, the silent promise that things on the inside were already different, were enough. My heart, for the first time, was beating inside a home, whole, welcomed, happy. And there, as I listened to the others' laughter in the hallway, I understood. A new story was beginning. And, in silence, I thanked life for allowing me to live it. Monday arrived as if time had chosen to slow down just to test our courage in everyday life. The sun streamed through still-closed curtains, spreading golden patches across the kitchen floor, and silence mingled with the smell of fresh coffee that Simon prepared before anyone else woke up. It was curious to note, every one of his gestures, no matter how small, now seemed to carry a double meaning, a mix of everyday life, affection, and secret. The world around us returned to its usual rhythm, but inside me, everything took on a different, more serious, more real weight. The following days unfolded under a sweet tension between what was just ours and the need to fit back into the scene of the Richardson house, where time seemed to spin in circles. Parker, oblivious, went on with commitments, college, plans for the next barbecue. Mrs. Richardson, always generous and affectionate, would ask if I felt well, if I needed anything. And when she smiled, she seemed to approve of my stay without knowing that, deep down, I was already part of another story, one no one there completely knew. Simon and I observed each other among the others, exchanging long glances at dinner, or casually bumping into each other in the hallways, increasingly part of a subtle dance of contained smiles and small touches under the table. It was impossible not to feel that urgent desire to say everything, to share with the whole world. But it was as if our pact of care and gentleness was too precious to be exposed immediately to the clarity of others. I wanted to live that 100 times before risking losing it. As the days passed, the feeling of belonging leaned in both directions. Sometimes I felt definitively part of that house. Other times I perceived myself almost a privileged spectator of an intimate and secret play. There were moments when, just hearing Simon's voice calling my name from the other side of the hallway, my entire body would relax, as if a gentle spell called me back into my own chest every time I got distracted from the present. Still, there was a subtle concern: how to preserve what belonged to us without hurting others. My heart felt heavy. Sometimes, I'd wake up in the middle of the night wondering if it would be fair to hide something so important from Parker, or from the Richardsons themselves, who trusted me as family. But every time I found myself walking alongside Simon in the neighborhood or sitting next to him on the couch during lazy afternoons, a certainty would invade me. Sometimes, you have to protect what's just starting so it can last. There was no farewell, after all, nor that typical conversation of ending or beginning again. There were no solemn promises, no big speeches. Instead, there was a choice, a silent assent that this bond needed its own time, safe from the world's eyes, but intense in the unspoken lines of every day. We chose to stay, each in our place, living the external routine lightly, but carrying within us a new commitment, built in the silence of rooms, in discreet touches at the coffee table, in long conversations after everyone was asleep. Simon sought me out in details. He left scribbled notes in my notebook, offered me the best piece of dinner, waited for me to walk back from our neighborhood strolls. I noticed that our plans were always projected for two, in the future, even if no one else perceived it. On one of those warm nights, lying beside him in the dark room, I asked, "Do you think what we have can survive on just details?" He smiled, pulling my face closer, and whispered back, "I think the detail is where everything that's true, and everything that's ours, lives." The need to reveal, little by little, became less urgent. I discovered there was a whole freedom in veiled complicity, in the daily construction of a bond that, though invisible to the rest of the house, flourished strongly in every shared routine. We were two people learning to exist in others' time, but also, and more importantly, in our own time. The secret stopped being a burden and became a shelter. And, little by little, I began to understand that to truly love was also to know how to wait for the right time, the right gesture, the safe moment to be more than a disguise. One late afternoon, during a simple family dinner, Parker announced he was going backpacking for 20 days and would disappear. My heart raced. The house would only have Simon, me, and Mrs. Richardson, which meant more space for those small, now irreversible gestures to extend in time. I felt Simon's hand lightly brush my leg under the table. It was a warning, almost an agreement. We didn't need to rush or invent, just live. After everyone went to sleep, we sat together on the porch, where the cool wind cradled our low voices and loose topics. Simon, with serene eyes, spoke naturally about the future, confided small dreams, traveling, finding new apartments, maybe a dog. Everything seemed possible suddenly. The mix of fear and hope was constant, but I learned to appreciate the butterflies in my stomach, like one appreciates the sun's shine after rainy days. The secret was generous, not imprisoning. On the contrary, it gave us a unique intimacy. At times, I had to stifle the urge to shout the happy news to the world, but I also learned to guard this treasure, the kind of love that grows best protected from haste and judgment. On the last Sunday before classes resumed, Simon decided to take an old box out of the attic. Inside, a forgotten school day Polaroid. Parker, Simon and I, much younger, sincere smiles, a huge sun behind us. Simon placed the photo in my hand, looked deeply, like someone who knows all the paths of silence, and whispered, "Look how much has changed." And at the same time, not really. I tucked the photo into my sketchbook, knowing I would never draw anything more meaningful than that frozen moment. The before and the after, blended into a sweet longing for all that was to come. The decision to stay, together, in that space of nuances, didn't become an announcement or a flag. We decided to keep pace, respecting the intervals of time, looking at the world from the inside out, like someone who chooses every day, in secret, just so as not to lose what they conquered for the first time: belonging, care, and the security of a silent but immense love in the sum of small days. And so, without much fanfare, I stayed. I stayed for myself, for Simon, for the stories that deserve to be told slowly. I learned that it's not always you find a home inside someone else, but when it happens, you instantly understand. There's nowhere else to go. Looking back, I realized that everything, even the discomfort of the first few days, was just preparation for that silent shift that transforms an ordinary story into a true refuge. All that old feeling of displacement, of only existing on the fringes of other people's lives, diminished. Now I understand. My place isn't a house, nor an address, not even the sofa of all afternoons. My place is in the presence of those who welcome me with the delicacy of a small gesture, an attentive gaze, a comfortable silence. I discovered that it's possible to love in secret, without camouflaging who I am, because when the surrender is true, it makes itself present even in absence, in a hidden note, in a smile in the hallway, in the smell of ready coffee that calls me to the kitchen before the rest of the house fully wakes up, even in the brief moments when I needed to hide, from the world, from fear, or from past expectations. I always found an anchor in Simon. He offered me a kind of companionship that doesn't demand fanfare or promises of eternity. Instead, he taught that a discreet gesture, a sincere word is enough to guarantee belonging. Now everything makes sense. Growing up doesn't mean fitting into others' molds, but defending your own shape in the mirror, accepting vulnerability, and most importantly, not running from feelings that are scary because they're so new. I learned that when we find someone willing to truly listen to us, even the noise of the world quiets down. The nights of doubt, the sluggish days of adaptation, the small resentments accumulated along the way only served to prepare me for that. The quiet certainty that being seen up close no longer has to be a threat, but an invitation. Besides Simon, every detail of the routine gained new color. Eating slightly undercooked bread in the middle of the night, silently hugging after a bad movie, watching the rain trickle down the windows on a slow afternoon, everything became a memory to cherish. I discovered that a moment's strength isn't in its size, but in the truth hidden in the most everyday gestures. The future became an open horizon, no longer a fear. If Parker will understand, I don't know. If one day we need to share the secret, we'll know when and how. For now, our sincere glances over coffee cups, our improvised lists of silly dreams jotted down on a piece of paper, the gentle promise of living one day at a time, are enough. Every night I lie down certain that, even if everything changes outside, my true home now exists. It's not made of walls, but of story and presence. It has no address, but it has scent, touch, affection. It has an origin, and it has a destiny too. And if you've made it this far, I hope you've felt a part of this story flowing through the lines, crossing your own memories of missed connections and belonging. If you believe that great new beginnings happen in the details, in friendships that transform, in the well-kept secret of a silent affection, click to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with anyone who needs a dose of hope in discreet love. What you hear here is just the beginning. The complete stories, unfiltered and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. See the link in the description right now. The journey of someone seeking their own place in the world might seem lonely, but remember, where there's honesty, there's always a new space to open. I invite you to follow along with us, because the next chapter might be closer than you think. Shall we discover together how small gestures transform everything? See you in the next episode.